preliminary investigation by the Department of Defense confirmed that it is likely that it was our own military that bombed a girls' school in Iran. This is one of the most devastating military mistakes in decades. 175 people were killed. Most of them were children. Now, before the investigation, Trump said over and over that the attack was done by Iran. But even after the investigation, Trump kept lying to the American people. He said, quote, he didn't know about the investigation, an investigation done by his own military on one of the most horrific military mistakes in recent history.
Something happened on the Senate floor that the news cycle buried in 12 hours. A senator stood up with numbers, with names, and with proof. And what she said next, no one in that chamber could walk back.
Donald Trump is trying to stop American citizens from voting. Why? Because he knows his agenda is unpopular and that Republicans can't win based on what he's doing. So he wants to rig the election by picking his own voters. And that is what the SAVE Act is all about. Don't let Trump and the Republicans in Congress fool you. They'll say things like, hey, you have to show an ID to vote. You should have to show an ID to vote, just like you have to do to buy a beer. But this is not an ordinary voter ID bill. This is not a bill that says everybody either has to show a driver's license or a student ID to vote. This is a way to keep American citizens from voting, and I will just give you one example around this. If this bill passes, then in 45 of the 50 states, your driver's license won't count as a valid ID. And then it gets better. Let's say you're a married woman who lives in Massachusetts, and let's say that when you got married, you took your husband's name. Well, when you go to the polls to vote, you can't register by showing them your updated driver's license. Why? Because Massachusetts is one of the 45 states where a driver's license does not prove citizenship. So you bring along your birth certificate, shows you were born in the United States. Can you vote now? Nope. Your birth certificate is still under your maiden name. So yeah, you can use a passport if you have one, but remember, fewer than half of all Americans have a passport, and it costs $165 to get one, and it takes a month or two if everything is working on time. No passport and no birth certificate that matches your driver's license, well, Trump and the Republicans say you're just out of luck. And that's just one example of how this bill will actually make it harder for Americans to vote. Here's another deeply disturbing thing about this bill. It would require states to hand over sensitive information about voters to Trump's Department of Homeland Security so that some shadowy guys can do whatever they want with it. Maybe they take you off the voter rolls. Maybe they use that information for something else. The point is, nobody really knows what will happen. This is an agency whose former leader, Kristi Noem, said just a few weeks ago, quote, we need to make sure that we have the right people voting. So just make a guess who's going to get swept off the voter rolls. People that the Republicans think are likely to vote Democratic. So sweep off black people, sweep off brown people, sweep off women, sweep off students, sweep off people in precincts that voted Democratic last time, sweep off people that you think might vote Democratic in the upcoming election. I've heard this bill called Jim Crow 2.0, harking back to the days in the South when the South blocked black people from being able to vote with a whole series of tests and barriers so that they just wouldn't have a chance to vote. The Trump bill is Jim Crow 2.0. Non-citizen voting is extremely rare in America, and Republicans know that. They've seen the same data that we have. Voter roll audits in Georgia prior to the 2024 election found only 20 registered non-citizens out of 8.2 million registered voters. That is 0.00024%. A 2024 Michigan audit found only 16 non-citizen votes out of 5.7 million votes. That's 0.00028%. So then what's going on? Why are the Republicans doing this? Why are they chewing up all of this time in the United States Senate to do this? Well, we don't have to guess, because the Republicans have been saying the quiet part out loud. Republicans in Congress know that they are in deep trouble for the midterms unless they can rig the rules and pick their own voters. Donald Trump even said it himself. He said passing the SAVE Act will, quote, guarantee the midterms. Because the Republicans know, and Donald Trump knows, that the policies that they are shoving through right now are wildly unpopular. So while Trump and Republicans try to spread conspiracies and lie about the SAVE Act, it's important that each and every one of us stays focused on what the Trump administration is really doing. And here's what the Trump administration is really doing. After promising no more wars, Donald Trump has dragged the United States into an illegal and reckless war with Iran. That's lie number one. Already, at least 200 American service members have been hurt. 13 service members have lost their lives. There are American lives lost and families grieving because Donald Trump dragged us into a war based on lies. A war launched without an imminent threat to our country and without any end in sight. Now, when he ran for president, Trump promised no wars. In fact, he kept saying he would be the, quote, president of peace. He lied. The U.S. is spending at least $1 billion a day on war with Iran. If we put the money that we're using at war with Iran toward health care, we could lower costs for millions of Americans. Just this week, Donald Trump's own energy secretary said out loud, quote, we were very aware that we would cause a little bit of increased prices on Americans. Think about that. Trump and his top officials knew that this war would raise costs for Americans, and they did it anyway. In just the first 6 days of the war, the Trump administration spent an estimated $11.3 billion. That was in 6 days. We also lost 3 F-15 aircraft in just those first few days. That'll cost us another $300 million. And estimates say that the Trump administration has kept burning about $1 billion, taxpayer dollars, a day on the war in Iran. And now we are on day 18. Some estimates look more like $2 billion a day. That's over $23,000 every second. Something like $11.5 million since I started this speech. So let's look at Trump's warmongering by the numbers. $11.3 billion, the estimated cost of the first 6 days of Trump's war. $5.6 billion, the cost of munitions spent by the Pentagon in the first 2 days of the war. $300 million, the cost to replace 3 F-15s lost to friendly fire in the first week of the war. $50 billion, how much the Trump administration says it wants to add to an already massively inflated defense budget to pay for a war that was never authorized by Congress. $1 trillion, the Pentagon's budget this year, $1.5 trillion, the total amount that Trump is reportedly requesting for the Pentagon budget for next year. That means Republicans in Congress want to increase the Pentagon's budget by $500 billion. Now, to put these numbers in context, the Trump administration will spend $30 billion in just the first 30 days of the war. That is exactly how much we could have used to lower costs for millions of people for an entire year, people who got knocked off their health care or saw their premiums go up because of Trump's health care cuts. So instead of going to war with Iran, we could lower health care costs and actually save lives here at home. Here's one more, $12 billion, a number we've already passed. $12 billion is what it would cost to restore the expanded child tax credit for 1 year. So in less than 2 weeks of Donald Trump's war, we spent the same amount of money that would have lifted millions of kids out of poverty. For the same amount the U.S. is burning on just one single day of Donald Trump's reckless war with Iran, we could provide a full year's worth of food assistance for nearly 500,000 Americans, or Medicaid coverage for 300,000 children. But there's one more thing we could have done with the $12 billion the Trump administration has spent on war with Iran. We could have provided housing assistance for around 1 million Americans. We could have lowered prescription drug costs for tens of millions of people. We could have paid the entire National Park Service for more than 3 years. We could have given Pell Grants to 1.6 million students so they could afford to go to college. We could have provided retirement and disability pay for veterans wounded in combat and still had plenty of money left over. We could have helped pay the salaries of more than 100,000 teachers and nurses, 2 jobs that are crucial and where we've seen shortages. We could have funded Direct File, the program that lets Americans file their taxes online and for free. We could have funded that for 2 whole decades. We could have provided humanitarian assistance for countries around the world for almost 3 full years. That is a huge amount of money. And I want to talk about one more thing we could be spending taxpayer money on instead of Trump's reckless war in Iran, making child care more affordable for families. Here's the thing. People have been getting child care all wrong. Child care costs are painfully high. Right now, families are having to choose between breaking the budget, being forced to cut back on work hours, or settling for lower quality care just to ensure that their kids have a safe place to be while the parents are working. In 49 of the 50 states, families pay more for child care for their 2 kids than they do for rent. And the reason why costs are so high is that right now people think of child care as a privilege or as a service that's for sale. That is wrong. We should be thinking of universal child care as basic public infrastructure. We should be thinking about it the same way we think about roads and highways. Why? Because for this country to work, we need to care for our kids. And when parents don't have child care, they can't go to work. Investing in universal child care is also good for our kids' development, and it is good for our economy. We need affordable child care just as much as we need schools to educate our workers and bridges to connect goods to the market. It's basic infrastructure to make this country run. It is the infrastructure we need to thrive. And up until now, our nation just hasn't been thinking about child care that way. This is why we need to invest in child care for every family. You know, it's just basic supply and demand. There are a whole bunch of families that need child care, but there are a whole lot fewer child care workers. Normally, when we want to attract more workers to an area, we just pay them more. But childcare prices are already sky high, and families just can't afford it. So where does that leave us? There's a huge gap that the federal government needs to fill. Imagine if the federal government didn't invest in roads and bridges, we just wouldn't have them. And that's what's happening with childcare. And it's why we need to invest in universal childcare and raise wages for childcare workers. They should at least make the same amount as local public school teachers. In the wealthiest country on this planet, access to affordable, high-quality childcare and early childhood education should not be a privilege reserved for the rich. It should be a right. But instead of talking about lowering child care costs, Donald Trump is delivering a punch to the gut to every parent struggling with those costs. Donald Trump is spending billions of dollars a week bombing Iran for reasons he cannot explain, but he cannot find a nickel to help the millions of people who are struggling to pay for health care, groceries, or child care. But this is a 1-2 punch. The Trump administration is spending a tremendous amount of money on war, and the war is also driving up costs for Americans. Take the price of gasoline over the past month. For months, Donald Trump has been saying gas prices are going down. He has been loud and proud about it. Right now, the average price for gas is more than $3.70 a gallon, more than 80 cents higher per gallon than just 1 month ago when Donald Trump started this war. That's more than a 25% increase in gas prices in a single month, which Donald Trump called a very small price to pay. Whoa, spoken like a billionaire. We have not seen gas prices jump this much since Russia attacked Ukraine. And now, Donald Trump's war is choking off the Strait of Hormuz. That's where about 1/5 of the world's oil and natural gas supply comes through, and right now, it's all bottled up. So what does that mean? Trump's war with Iran means gas prices are skyrocketing for American families here at home. And Donald Trump's response? If they rise, they rise. In other words, he just doesn't care. Here's another one. Food prices. About 1/3 of the world's fertilizer goes through that same Strait of Hormuz, and the prices jumped up by 30% in the days after Trump started this war. One U.S. farmer even said his fertilizer suppliers are warning that they just can't get the fertilizer. It's not only the price has gone up, it just literally is not available. So you've got all this fertilizer that can't go through the Strait of Hormuz, can't make it to our farmers here in America. And without that fertilizer, the farmers say they just can't plant as much food this year. And what's that going to mean? It means food prices will go up. So that's gasoline, that's food. But the prices of clothes, of technology, basically anything that's moved around by trucks that use gasoline or diesel, the prices for all of those goods will go up as well. Diesel prices are already up by more than 25%, raising the cost of shipping goods, including Amazon packages and food, nationwide. And jet fuel prices have shot up by 58% since Trump started the war. Airlines are passing these costs on to consumers by pushing ticket.
This is the moment the speech shifts from policy argument to direct accusation. 6 contradictions. On record. Named. What you're watching isn't just political opposition. It's a senator building an evidentiary case in real time, using the administration's own words as the weapon. Every quote she cites came from a microphone that was on. Every contradiction is documented. The machinery behind this war has been lying in multiple directions simultaneously, and nobody in the mainstream press has laid it out this cleanly in a single statement. Which lie bothers you the most? Drop it in the comments right now.
Prices up even higher. Donald Trump's war with Iran is gearing up to become another forever war that burns billions of taxpayer dollars and makes life even more expensive for Americans here at home. This is a war that the American people do not want and did not ask for, but they're the ones who are footing the bill. And what does Trump administration have to say about that? Well, listen to Trump's top economic advisor. He said, quote, "If the war were to be extended, it wouldn't really disrupt the U.S. economy very much at all. It would hurt consumers, and we'd have to think about what we'd want to do about that. But that's really the last of our concerns right now." Consumers, the last of our concerns. Higher prices for your family, the last of our concerns, according to the Trump administration. Look, you don't need to wonder why prices are going up. The Trump administration has said the quiet part out loud. The higher costs for American families are the last of the concerns for the Trump administration, and they can't even be bothered to worry about lowering costs for the American people. Lie number 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6. Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, and other top Trump officials just can't keep their story straight. They have no clear plan and for weeks have failed to tell the American people what the goals are for this war and when this war will end. First, Trump said the war would be over in 4 to 5 weeks. Okay, that was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Trump has said all of these things. The war is won. The U.S. still needs to finish the job. The operations could end soon. The military may need to go further. Every hour, the Trump administration's justification for this war sounds completely different. Why did the U.S. strike Iran? On March 2nd, Pete Hegseth said it was to end a 47-year war. The same day, Hegseth said it's because Iran refused to negotiate. And in another comment on the same day, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said it was a response to Israel planning to strike. And then, on the same day, Donald Trump said it had nothing to do with Israel planning to strike. Donald Trump said, quote, "If anything, I might have forced Israel's hand." Rubio then said Iran would have, quote, "so many short-range missiles in a year. That's the reason to initiate the war." 2 days later, Trump says the reason why the U.S. struck Iran is because he had, quote, "a good feeling that Iran would strike U.S. assets and our personnel in the region." Look, there's just one story after another, and none of them add up. How can the American people trust this government when this government can't even keep its own story straight? And the Trump administration clearly has no plan for how this war will end. On the very first day of the war, Trump called the attacks, quote, "major combat operations in Iran." A week later, Trump called it, quote, "short-term excursion that were, quote, getting very close to finishing." And what's the goal? The administration has no clue. On day 1 of the war, Trump told the American people he had to attack Iran because Iran posed an imminent threat based on their nuclear capabilities. But remember, last June, Trump bombed Iran and claimed that Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities had been, quote, "completely and totally obliterated." Both of those things cannot be true at the same time. And understand this, if Trump believes that Iran's nuclear ambitions are a threat, then he had a chance to curb them. In fact, the United States had a deal that could have prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That was President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran, and Trump ripped up that deal, and here's the best part, got nothing in return. So instead of doing the hard work of diplomacy to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, Trump lies to the American people while dragging us into yet another reckless war that is costing American lives. If you can believe it, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth have even given conflicting takes on whether or not this war is over. On March 8th, Hegseth said, quote, "This is only just the beginning." The next day, March 9th, Trump said the war is, quote, "complete," pretty much. But he also said, quote, "You could say both, very complete and just the beginning." Trump also said, quote, that we haven't won enough and that we will, quote, "go further." But just days later, he said, quote, "We won. The first hour, it was over." And then he said, quote, "We don't want to leave early, do we? We've got to finish the job." Then last week, Trump said, "We're ramping up strikes." How long will this war go on? Well, one day after the war, Trump said, quote, 4 to 5 weeks. The same day, Hegseth said, quote, "more or less than 2, 4, or 6 weeks. And then he added, quote, "it could move up, it could move back." Then Hegseth said, quote, "we'll go as far as we need to go to advance American interest." On March 10th, Hegseth said, "it's up to Trump." He said, quote, "our will is endless. Ultimately, the president gets to determine the end state of those objectives." On March 11th, Trump said the war with Iran will end, quote, "soon." Look, this is not a game. This administration is sending young Americans to die overseas. And that means our government leaders need to treat this conflict with life and death seriousness. Instead, they don't even have the decency to level with the American people. Yet another lie from the Trump administration was about the horrific U.S. military strike on an elementary school in the early days of the war. Last week, a preliminary investigation by the Department of Defense confirmed that it is likely that it was our own military that bombed a girls' school in Iran. This is one of the most devastating military mistakes in decades. 175 people were killed. Most of them were children. Now, before the investigation, Trump said over and over that the attack was done by Iran. But even after the investigation, Trump kept lying to the American people. He said, quote, he didn't know about the investigation, an investigation done by his own military on one of the most horrific military mistakes in recent history. And remember, Pete Hegseth gutted the office that was in charge of preventing civilian harm. How do I know? I led the charge to establish that office in the first place. Hegseth is also purging the military's legal experts, the people who act as legal guardrails, and ordered a, quote, ruthless overhaul to make sure that no one else who might question him is left standing. It is a betrayal of our service members and a betrayal of the American people that we still have no answers and no accountability. So what would accountability look like here? Well, for starters, Pete Hegseth should be fired immediately. Hegseth's long pattern of chaos and incompetence has put our service members and the American people at risk. And we haven't even scratched the surface of Signalgate or Hegseth's role in the boat strikes that could be war crimes. Pete Hegseth has got to go and he needs to go now. Now, the basic story here is pretty straightforward. Working families are struggling to pay for basic needs like groceries, housing, healthcare, electricity, and now prices are shooting up even higher because of Donald Trump's new war in Iran. Donald Trump's dangerous actions overseas are making everyday life both more expensive, and regular Americans are paying the price. That's Trump's America in a nutshell. And instead of changing their policies and actually trying to help the American people and not just themselves and their rich buddies, Trump and the Republicans are working to keep as many Americans from voting as humanly possible. That's what this bill is really about. And every senator who cares about our democracy should vote no.
175 people were
Mr.
killed.
President,
Most of
I
them were
yield.
children. And the president said he didn't know about the investigation his own military conducted. That is not a gaffe. That is not a communications failure. That is a government that has decided the American people do not deserve the truth, even when children are dead. What you just watched was not a standard opposition speech. Senator Warren came to the Senate floor with a structure that most political commentary refuses to use: sequence, documentation, and consequence. She didn't speculate. She quoted. She didn't accuse without evidence. She read the record back, date by date, statement by statement, and let the contradictions speak at full volume. And here is what the coverage will not tell you. The SAVE Act argument and the Iran war argument are not two separate topics. They are the same story told from two different angles. On one side, a bill that makes it structurally harder for specific categories of Americans to vote: married women, students, black and brown communities, people without passports. On the other side, a war that was never authorized by Congress, built on shifting justifications, and now confirmed to have killed children in a school. Both of those things are happening at the same time. Both are being driven by the same administration. And the political system is only capable of covering one of them on any given news cycle. That is not an accident. Think about what this means if you are sitting on the other side of this. If you support this administration, you have to reconcile at least one of the following. Either the president genuinely did not know that his own Department of Defense had concluded it was likely his military bombed a girls' school, which is a catastrophic failure of command, or he knew and chose to tell the public something different. There is no third option. Both are serious. Neither has been treated as serious by the people who are supposed to hold this government accountable. But here is what nobody is asking. Why is the justification for this war still changing on day 18? On the first day, it was imminent nuclear threat. Then it was ending a 47-year conflict. Then it was Iran refusing to negotiate. Then it was Israel planning to strike. And then the same day, Trump said it had nothing to do with Israel. Then it was a feeling. A feeling. The Secretary of Defense and the President gave contradictory answers about whether the war is over or just beginning. On the same day, sometimes within hours of each other. No functioning military operation runs on that kind of internal contradiction, which means either the administration has no coherent strategy and is improvising at scale, or the stated reasons were never the real reasons, and the real reasons are not something they intend to share with the public. Supporters of the administration will argue that Warren is a partisan voice and that this is an opposition hit job dressed up as a floor speech. That argument deserves a fair hearing. Warren is a Democrat. She has policy disagreements with this administration that predate the war. Her framing is pointed and deliberate. Nothing she said was neutral. But here is what that argument cannot explain. The quotes she read are real. The investigation she cited is real. The Department of Defense confirmed it. Not a political opponent, not a left-leaning outlet. His own military. And the cost figures she used are drawn from Pentagon and Congressional Budget Office reporting. The contradictions she cataloged are documented, time-stamped, and in the public record. If this is the analysis you are not finding anywhere else, you already know what to do. Critics on the other side will say Warren didn't go far enough, that she stopped short of demanding a full congressional investigation, that calling for Hegseth's firing is a political demand, not a structural remedy, that gutting the Civilian Harm Prevention Office, an office she helped create, should have triggered an emergency legislative response weeks ago, not a floor speech. Those critics are not wrong. What this moment reveals about where the country actually is. There is a war in progress that most Americans did not vote for and cannot fully track because the people running it cannot keep their story straight. There is an election law moving through Congress that uses the language of security to engineer a specific electoral outcome. There are 13 American service members dead, at least 200 wounded, and a school full of children that our own military likely destroyed. And the administration's top economic advisor has said on record that the cost impact on American consumers is, quote, the last of our concerns. That sentence should have ended careers. It didn't. The historical parallel that nobody wants to say out loud, the pattern of a war launched on shifting justifications, with no clear endpoint, with civilian casualties that the government initially blamed on the enemy, that pattern has a name. The American public has lived through that pattern before. It did not end cleanly. It did not end quickly. And the people who paid the highest price were not the ones who started it. Why now? That is the question. An administration facing deep midterm unpopularity, according to its own president's public statements about the SAVE Act, launches a war 18 days before this speech. Gas prices up over 25% in a month. Fertilizer prices up 30%. Jet fuel up 58%. And the response from the top economic advisor is that consumer impact is the last concern. This story is not finished. The investigation into the school bombing is preliminary. The war is ongoing. The SAVE Act has not yet passed or failed. The Hegseth accountability question remains open. And the American public is being asked to process all of it simultaneously, at speed, with a media environment that moves on before the consequences land. What happens next will not be determined by what was said on the Senate floor today. It will be determined by whether the people watching pay close enough attention to demand an answer. The floor is still warm, the record is still open, and 13 families are still waiting for someone to tell them the truth. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This conversation is just getting started.